I think progressives and Hillbots agree. We need to defeat Donald Trump. And it's not just about Donald Trump. It's about the growing disregard of fact, the growing disregard of data, the growing disregard of humanity. Because Donald Trump is an unprecedented threat to humanity. A second child just died in custom and border protection. So just because I don't cover Donald Trump 25 videos in a row, just because I don't do Trump, Russia, what Trump tweets all day long, which is, I think, why this status quo is succeeding, because we don't do that. There's plenty of that. I'm not interested in doing that. Doesn't mean I don't see the real need to defeat Donald Trump. But the difference between progressives and neoliberal, corporate-loving hacks is facts. Because the facts are very, very clear. There is a factual and data-based path to defeating Donald Trump. And it's not up for debate. There's numbers, there's polls, there's facts, and there's common sense with how you defeat Donald Trump. And extreme establishment, extreme republicanism, extreme conservatism. And you want to know what path that is? Progressive politics. Progressive populism, not fake, phony Donald Trump populism, progressive populism. So what the corporate media is now engaged in, which, let's face it, is a coordinated, it's like a corporate media military operation. It's like they're all in a room with the map of how to tackle Bernie, how to take down Bernie. Because they know that they cannot take down Bernie. The only way to defeat Donald Trump is with a extreme contrast, a extreme progressive populist contrast. And I want to tell you right now, December 30th, 2018, and record me what I'm about to say. If the corporate media continues their very clear media militaristic operation against Bernie Sanders and essentially, I mean, cap him at the knees, the corporate media that is basically part of the establishment is going to reelect Donald Trump. And when they reelect Donald Trump, because they elected Donald Trump in the first place, don't come crying to progressives. Don't come attacking, those Bernie people, because they are doing it. So I hope you have eaten breakfast. I know it's early on the West Coast, because I have some articles to read to you. And honestly, it's at this point, I'm going to debunk all this shit so you know how to debunk it with the neoliberal where you live. Because the pieces coming out about Bernie Sanders and why, his war against Beto O'Rourke and why Bernie has lost his mojo and all this stuff, it's the starkest propaganda I have ever read. And I've been in media now going on 11, 12 years. The stuff I've read this week it's propaganda. I want to read to you this New York Times piece, which honestly, it's so laughable, I don't even know where to start. Like, I'm surprised that these are paid political journalists because it's just propaganda. And I'm going to go through it point by point. Point by point. And while I'm reading this to you, I can't see the super chat, so I will go back and look if people donate to the super chat while I'm reading this. So, the New York Times, who basically has alternated with the Washington Post and Politico, and every week it's one of them, and sometimes all of them, putting out propaganda about Bernie Sanders. And they clearly have a goal of making it seem like Bernie Sanders is losing his mojo, or Bernie Sanders doesn't have the support he had in 2016, or Bernie Sanders is too old, or Bernie Sanders this, that. They're basically trying to eliminate the gravest threat, because the New York Times is part of the establishment. So, their headline, Bernie Sanders holding on to 2020, holding on to support may be hard at a 2020 bid. Yeah. the most popular politician in America, it's definitely going to be hard holding on to support. So right there, the headline is just ridiculous. Some of his top congressional supporters won't commit to backing him if he runs for president again. And two may join the 2020 race themselves. A handful of former aides might work for other candidates. And Bernie Sanders' initial standing in Iowa's polls is well below the 49.6% he captured in nearly defeating Hillary Clinton there in 2016. So, right there in the first paragraph, a handful of his former aides might work for other candidates. I cover politics. That's pretty much the mainstream of politics. People work for one campaign 1 year, and sometimes they work for another campaign in another election, even if the first one they worked for is running again. Sometimes it's because they'll get a different higher position in the second campaign. Sometimes it's because they're going to get paid more in another campaign. Just, I'm not condescending, but I want to explain political operatives. Political operatives who, even if they work for Bernie Sanders, are focused on their careers too. So let's say there's somebody in Bernie's campaign that's thinking about, if Beto O'Rourke runs, maybe I'm going to go run for Beto. I'm going to go work for Beto O'Rourke. It's not necessarily that they have a Beto, poster above their bed now, but maybe they'll have a different, better position in Beto's campaign. Maybe they'll get paid more in Beto's campaign. But the New York Times, in this article, makes it seem like, people are fleeing Bernie Sanders to go work for other campaigns. That's just not the case. Mr. Sanders may have been the runner-up in the last Democratic primary, but instead of expanding his nucleus of support in the fashion of most repeat candidates, the Vermont senator is struggling to retain even what he garnered 2 years ago when he was far less of a political star than he is today. Quote, "It's not a given that I'm going to support Bernie just because I did before," said Lucy Flores, a former Nevada assemblyman. "There are going to be plenty of people to look at and to listen to. I'm currently open at this point, and I think the majority of people are as well." So, a few things for that. Because, when I say propaganda, I mean it's propaganda. So when they say Bernie Sanders, in the fashion of most, instead of expanding his nucleus of support, in the fashion of most repeat candidates, the Vermont senator is struggling to retain even what he garnered 2 years ago. That is factually a lie. And let's call it what it is. That is a lie. You want to know why? Because we have numbers. There's a thing called numbers. Here is a recent Gallup poll of Bernie Sanders' favorable ratings among groups. Bernie Sanders has 54% favorable rating among independents. That has remained steady since 2016. Bernie Sanders has a 78% favorability among Democrats. That is slightly up since 2016. Bernie Sanders has a 64% support among non-whites. That is significantly up since 2016. Bernie Sanders, 18 to 34, has held his level of support. Bernie Sanders, 35 to 54, has held his level of support. Very importantly, Bernie Sanders, 55 and older, who was the Hillary Clinton voter, 45% support, favorability rating, higher than in 2016. So there is not one category that Gallup, most people consider Gallup a respectable poll, there's not one category he has lost support. Not one. So maybe the New York Times labels, what did they say? He's not expanding his nucleus of support. I guess the New York Times considers like people who endorsed him now not automatically endorsing him to mean he's not expanding his nucleus of support. But actually, by the numbers, yes, he is. He is up among non-whites. He is up against older Americans. And I'm not saying 55 makes you old, but obviously it's older than those other categories. So right there, it's not like the New York Times doesn't have this information. They're choosing to lie about Bernie Sanders' actual support levels. They're choosing to lie. The second thing, I don't know Lucy Flores. I have nothing against her. So who gives a fuck if Lucy Flores isn't coming out for Bernie Sanders? Who cares? I don't mean that negative against her as a person, because I don't know her, but Lucy Flores isn't exactly like Nina Turner. Lucy Flores is not Jeff Weaver, his campaign manager. Lucy Flores was a lower level surrogate who endorsed Bernie Sanders. So the New York Times, their headline is, he may have a hard time holding on to support. Within the first two paragraphs, they lie about the numbers. This is not like a mistake. They're lying. They know they're lying. And then their first person who is not on board necessarily with Bernie again is a former Nevada assemblywoman. Again, I'm not knocking her. I'm sure she's progressive. I don't really know. But who cares if she supports Bernie Sanders or not? Again, it's not important which low-level political people support Bernie Sanders. It's important, A, how many American citizens support Bernie Sanders, and more importantly, how many American citizens support Bernie Sanders' issues, which we're going to get to. And by the way, I cursed, so there goes the monetization for this video. As Mr. Sanders considers a second bid for the White House, he and his advisors are grappling with the political reality that he would face a far different electoral landscape than in 2016. Rather than being the only progressive opponent to an establishment-backed frontrunner, the Vermont Independent would join what may be the most crowded, fractured, and uncertain Democratic primary in the last quarter century. There would also be candidates who are newer to the national political scene than Mr. Sanders, offering fresh energy, something many in the party prefer, as well as those who echo his message about economic justice and the corrosive effects of money in politics. Quote, ironically, Bernie's agenda for working families will be the Democratic Party's message in 2020, but he may not be the one leading the parade, said Bill Press, a talk show host. Bill Press, I don't know what to say about that, but Bill Press, that's not the Democratic Party's message. That might be what they say, but smart minds know the Democratic Party's message doesn't match their actual voting record and the money they take. They don't give a damn about working families. They give a damn about their donors. So sorry, Bill Press, but that's not true. The other thing is, there's now this common talking point. There's now this common talking point that voters really want something new. They want something fresh. There's nothing to back that up. There's a poll here or there. It really depends on how they ask the questions. But does anybody truly think after the political awakening of 2016, that millennial voters that flocked to Bernie Sanders, that older progressives that flocked to Bernie Sanders, are all of a sudden, because they see like a good-looking white guy on a skateboard, are gonna like go vote for him because he's the new fresh thing? Does anybody really believe the majority of people are that stupid? Because there's a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters who frankly are uninformed or intentionally misinformed. But these pundits, they want to ram this belief. They want to ram this belief that people want something new. Bernie's too old, but they don't mind Joe Biden, who's a year younger than Bernie. But people want something new. And they insult you, the American people, and progressives, to think that it's not necessarily the policies that you care about, it's the personality, it's the charisma. And they don't have any data to back this up. And by the way, the very people writing these articles, and I got a few more to read to you, unfortunately, the very people writing these articles are the very people who were so deadly, catastrophically wrong in 2016. These are the very people the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and Jonathan Chait, who I couldn't believe this article this New York Magazine guy wrote. It is so devoid of any facts or common sense. It's just propaganda. So basically, they're trying to get you to believe that because Lucy Flores, who again, not insulting her, don't know her, it's not about Lucy, but a low-level surrogate and a former assemblywoman from Nevada, isn't coming out for Bernie right away. And Simone Sanders, who is Bernie Sanders' press secretary, and I'm sorry to tell you, I worked on the campaign. I covered the campaign. I think Simone is a lovely person. She's a fantastic, she's on CNN. She's a wonderful African-American woman. It was great to see her as Bernie's press secretary. But if I'm keeping it real, you watch me because I keep it real, she's a political operative. So she's going to go with the person she thinks has the best chance. She's going to go with the person, the candidate she thinks has the best chance. And frankly, sources I have, Bernie's campaign wasn't so upset when she left. So I'm not knocking her. I've talked to her. She's a nice woman, but you know, they're mentioning that Simone Sanders, who was Bernie Sanders' campaign press secretary, isn't automatically endorsing him and telling him to come out means he's losing support. They're basically grasping onto any straw to put out propaganda, to try and paint it. It's basically, the corporate media is, in effect, trying to do what the superdelegate system did in 2016. They're trying to make it seem like Bernie is defeated out of the gate, like he has no shot, by totally making up numbers, by totally pushing out propaganda, and by basically deciding the election before any votes are counted. That is what the superdelegate system did, and that's what pieces like this in the New York Times are doing.